Hello, I'm VI Attorney General Denise George. March 25th is annually recognized as the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. On this day, we honor and remember those who suffered and lost their lives at the hands of the brutal slavery system. As per the United Nations, for over 400 years, more than 15 million men, women, and children fell victims to the slave trade, which is said to be the worst violation of human rights in history. Last year, I, along with several attorneys general, toured one of several ancient forts built by the Europeans along the Gold Coast, now modern-day Ghana, which was the hub of the transatlantic slave trade. In remembrance, I want to share that memory with you. There were a number of what they called castles built along the coastline, and those castles were primarily used for trading, including for slave trading, specifically the transatlantic slave trade. And those are the so-called class castles that they held the Africans that were captured in dungeons.
They were held there in severe and inhumane conditions for months before their departure. The African captives who survived the cruelty of such captivity were then forcibly taken through the door of no return.
And if you go through this door of no return, during the time of slave trade as a black person, one, you will lose your identity. You will lose your culture. You will lose your respect, dignity, everything.
At that point, when they were loaded and crammed on the ships which sailed across the Atlantic and then landed in the Caribbean, then the United States as well. The Christian Board Castle, I learned, which sits actually in Accra, right on the coast, along the coast, has recorded that over 123,000 captured Africans were enslaved there and transported from the Christian Board Castle that was owned by the Danes across the Atlantic straight to the Danish West Indies.
The Danish West Indies was comprised of St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. Among them were the Akwamu people of Ghana, including members of the Akwamu royal family who were enslaved on St. John. In 1733, they led the first and longest recorded slave revolt in North American history. The St. John insurrection lasted 6 months until April 1734, when the Danish regained control of St. John, and many of the African revolutionaries committed suicide, some by jumping off a cliff to their death to avoid being recaptured, tortured, and re-enslaved.
To actually go into the dungeons where my ancestors, where the Africans were captured and held and enslaved and kept and crammed in there with in the most deplorable of conditions, without bathroom facilities, without proper light, without any opportunity for hygiene, and kept there for months until their departure to the slave ships. To actually stand in there and walk that path that they walked, and to see and feel what they experienced, was extremely moving. I'll say, I cried that day. But at the same time, there was somewhat of a blessing in it, and I guess in knowing and feeling that connection that I did not expect that I would have felt, that was beautiful at the same time, because we're able, although having experienced that and walking that path, and somewhat in some way experiencing a little bit of, or seeing a little bit of what it is, or being connected and seeing what it is that got them there, or that they experience, is also something that we can, from now looking forward, maintain those connections. This year, the theme is Ending Slavery's Legacy of Racism, a global imperative for justice. As we remember the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, we should stand committed to continuing the fight against racism and violence. And we should stand always for justice and equality in every area of our lives today.